Have you ever been on a treadmill, just running at a steady, totally comfortable
Yeah,
pace?
feeling pretty good about the workout.
Exactly, feeling good, but then suddenly somebody sneaks up and just cranks the belt speed way up.
Oh, I hate that.
Right. And you are still moving your legs forward. You haven't stopped running. But despite that forward motion, you are just rapidly, undeniably being thrown to the back of the machine.
Yeah, you're hanging on for dear life at that point.
It's terrifying. It's that realization that your forward momentum is, it's just no longer enough to keep you in place. You're growing, you're moving, but you're still losing ground.
And the most disorienting part of that specific experience is that if you only look down at your own feet, everything seems totally fine.
Right, because you're doing what you always do.
Exactly. You're making progress relative to your past self. It is only when you look up and see the room around you that you realize, oh, the fundamental rules of the game have changed, and I am actively being left behind.
And that feeling, that absolute disorientation of moving forward but somehow falling behind, is exactly what we are diving into today.
It's such a crucial topic.
We're going on a deep dive into a phenomenon that I really think defines the modern economic era for so many places around the globe. And to do this, we're looking at a super specific, really fascinating case study from our stack of sources today.
The Federated States of Micronesia.
Yes, the FSM.
And it's just a brilliant lens through which to view this much broader global issue. For you listening right now, this isn't just a geography lesson about some small island nation in the Western Pacific Ocean.
No, not at all.
This is really a masterclass in reading between the lines of global data. It's about understanding the hidden currents that dictate who wins and who loses in the 21st century.
And how those traditional metrics of success can sometimes just completely blind us to an actual structural collapse. So I want to start by throwing a paradox out there. Because when I was initially looking through the Human Development Index data, the HDI, which is basically the United Nations gold standard for measuring a country's health, education, and standard of living, the numbers for FSM over the last couple of decades looked like a pretty solid success story.
Or at least, a story of slow and steady progress.
Right. Because between the year 2000 and 2023, their HDI score went from 0.596 to 0.615. That is, by definition, mathematical growth.
It is. The score is definitely higher today than it was 2 decades ago.
Yeah.
Babies born in FSM today are entering a country that, on paper at least, has a higher development score than the one their parents were born into.
But then you turn the page in the data, and you look at their global rank.
This is where it gets rough.
Yeah. How they actually stack up against every other country on Earth, and the bottom just completely falls out. In the year 2000, FSM was ranked 118th in the world. By 2023, despite their score going up, their ranking plummeted to 157th.
A drop of 39 spots.
They fell 39 spots. It's this slow-motion, decades-long free fall in the global hierarchy.
Which really forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question about how we measure progress. I mean, how can a country's development scores go up year after year while their global standing absolutely plummets?
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Imagine you're a student, right? And you get a B on a math test instead of a B minus. You still improved. You learn more math. Why should it matter to you, or to the people of FSM, that a bunch of other students in the class suddenly started getting A pluses?
Because a B is still better than a B minus.
Exactly. You can still use that math in the real world. Isn't any growth good growth?
It's a totally fair pushback. And that's actually the intuitive way we all look at our own personal progress. We measure ourselves against our past selves.
Right.
But human development, on a macroeconomic scale, is not graded in a vacuum. It is graded on a global curve. And more importantly, it is competing in a global market.
Okay, competing how?
Think about it in terms of global capital, technology, and talent. If your country's infrastructure, technology, and educational output are improving by, say, 1% a year, but the global average is improving, the purchasing power is shrinking.
Oh, I see.
Your ability to attract foreign investment is actively shrinking.
Because the investors are looking at the whole global menu of options, and they're choosing the countries growing at 5%.
Precisely. And it goes beyond just corporate investment. It affects your citizens' ability to compete in a globalized workforce.
Right, the actual people.
Yeah. If a student in FSM is learning 1990s computer skills, while a student in, Southeast Asia is learning artificial intelligence, the FSM student's so-called growth is practically irrelevant on the global stage.
Wow.
You are losing competitive advantage every single day. Small, isolated growth equates to de facto regression when the rest of the world is basically on a bullet train.
So it's not just about bragging rights at the UN. Falling behind in rank has literal physical consequences for the people living there.
It absolutely does. Falling from 118th to 157th means you are being squeezed out of that medium development tier and pushed straight toward the bottom.
Yeah.
It affects the terms on which global institutions will lend you money to build a new hospital or pave a road. It dictates the horizon of opportunities available to a child born in that country today. The world just doesn't wait for you to catch up.
Man. And to really see how massive that gap has become, we have to look at what that global bullet train was actually doing during the same time period.
It's a global wave.
Exactly. Because the data shows the global average HDI trendline just rising relentlessly. Back in 1990, the global average was 0.60. By 2023, it was 0.756.
That is a massive leap.
It is. We are talking about billions of people globally living longer, getting way more years of schooling, and drastically increasing their income over just a 30-year window.
What is really vital to understand about that global curve is how resilient it is. Look at the data between 2019 and 2021.
Right, the pandemic.
Yeah. For the first time since the HDI was literally created, human development actually went backward globally. The score dropped from 0.745 down to 0.742.
Driven almost entirely by COVID-19, right? Like the massive hit to global life expectancy, economy shutting down, schools closing.
Yes, exactly. A profound global trauma that was immediately recorded in the data. But look at what happens next.
The bounce back.
By 2022 and 2023, the global average violently rebounds. It shoots right back up, erases the pandemic losses, and hits that brand new high of 0.756. The global system has this incredible elastic capacity to absorb a shock and immediately return to aggressive growth.
Okay, so now contrast that elastic, hyper-aggressive growth with the reality in the Federated States of Micronesia. We established they went from 0.596 in the year 2000 to 0.615 in 2023.
Very different picture.
If you break that down into decades, it is almost painfully stagnant. In 2000, they were at 0.596. 10 years later, in 2010, they've barely moved to 0.603.
Barely a blip.
Another 13 years later, in 2023, they are at 0.615. Over a 24-year period, their total human development grew by roughly 3.2%.
3.2% in a quarter of a century. It's microscopic.
And when you look really closely at the ranking data, you can actually pinpoint the exact moment the treadmill really threw them off.
The turning point.
Yeah. Up until about 2011, FSM was hovering around the 141st or 142nd rank globally. They were low, but they were, stable. They were holding onto the treadmill rails.
Right, maintaining their spot.
But then, in 2012, something breaks. They fall past rank 145 and officially enter this long-term, uninterrupted downward channel that leads straight to 157th today. What actually happened in 2012? Was there some sort of localized disaster?
It's less about a localized disaster in Micronesia and actually more about what was happening everywhere else in the world.
Oh, the curve shifted.
Exactly. Around 2012, the global rebound from the 2008 financial crisis really took root, particularly in the developing world. Nations across Asia, parts of sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America just started experiencing rapid compounded growth.
Fueled by what, mostly?
Foreign direct investment, mobile technology proliferation, and globalized supply chains really coming online.
Yeah.
FSM, mostly due to its extreme geographic isolation and structural limitations, simply could not participate in that surge.
So the rest of the developing world basically stepped on the gas, and FSM stayed in first gear.
That's exactly it.
So if we want to understand why they are stuck in first gear, we need to open up the hood of this index and look at the engine parts.
We have 4 main metrics to look at to really understand this.
Right. And just to define these for you listening, so we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
There's the standard HDI, which is health, education, and economy. Then there's the GDI, measuring the gender gap in that HDI.
Then the GII, which gets into reproductive health and empowerment.
And finally, the PHDI, which adjusts everything for planetary pressure and environmental costs.
Perfect. So let's start with the main HDI engine, because I would argue that 2 of its core cylinders are fundamentally compromised, and they are feeding into each other in a deeply destructive cycle.
Education and economy.
Yes. Let's examine the education data first, because it reveals a really fascinating paradox about structural design versus actual human behavior.
When I was looking at the education metrics, I was trying to come up with an analogy. And the best way I can describe FSM's education system based on this data is that it basically operates like a brilliant taxpayer-funded research and development lab for a rival company.
A rival company. Okay, I'm intrigued. Walk me through that.
Well, the HDI measures education in two ways. First, it looks at expected years of schooling. This is basically asking, if a kid enters the school system today based on current enrollment rates, how many years of education can we expect them to get?
Right.
And FSM's numbers here are actually pretty solid. In 2023, their expected years of schooling is 11.54 years.
Which really is not drastically far off the global average of 13.04 years.
Exactly.
It means the physical infrastructure of schooling exists there. The classrooms are built, the teachers are in them, and the cultural expectation is that a child will go through primary and most of secondary school.
Right. The FSM government is spending the money. They are running the R&D lab and investing in these kids for 11 and a half years.
Okay.
But then you look at the second metric, which is mean years of schooling. This measures the actual average number of years of education completed by adults aged 25 and older who are currently living in the country. It is the real-world educational capital of the workforce. And in FSM, that number plummets to 7.33 years.
I see exactly where your analogy is going. There's a massive 4-year gap between the education the system is providing to the youth and the education retained by the adult workforce.
Exactly. The global average for mean years of schooling is 8.7 years. FSM is at 7.33. So the question is, where did those 4 years go? If kids are expected to go to school for almost 12 years, why do the adults walking around the islands only have a 7th or 8th grade education on average?
Well, mechanically, there are really only two explanations for a gap that severe. The first is an internal failure. Extremely high dropout rates.
Right.
It is entirely possible that while students enroll in early grades, economic pressures force them to abandon high school to engage in subsistence farming, fishing, or informal labor just to support their families.
Which happens in a lot of developing nations, but you hinted to me earlier that there is a second, much more specific structural reason for FSM.
Yes. To understand FSM's data, you really have to understand its unique geopolitical architecture. Specifically a treaty called the Compact of Free Association, or COFA, which they hold with the United States.
This is such a crucial piece of context. How does COFA actually work?
Under this agreement, the U.S. provides financial assistance and defense to FSM. But crucially, and this is a big one, it grants citizens of the Federated States of Micronesia the right to travel, live, and work in the United States and its territories, like Guam and Hawaii, without needing a visa.
Wait, really? So an 18-year-old in FSM can literally just buy a plane ticket, land in Honolulu, and immediately start applying for jobs?
Exactly. Just walk right in. And they are eligible for U.S. federal education grants, like the Pell Grant, to attend American universities.
Oh, wow.
So let's look at your R&D lab analogy. FSM spends its very limited domestic resources educating a bright student for 11 or 12 years. That student excels, graduates, and immediately realizes that the local island economy cannot offer them a job that matches their skill level.
So they leave.
They utilize that COFA agreement, they fly out to Guam, Hawaii, or the mainland U.S., they get a job, they settle down, and they don't come back.
The rival company, the U.S. economy, gets the patent on the product FSM spent over a decade developing.
That is the textbook definition of brain drain. The FSM is effectively exporting its most valuable resource. It's educated youth.
That's devastating.
It is. The educational capital doesn't stay on the islands to build local businesses, innovate new industries, or improve governance. It leaves. And that is why the mean years of schooling for the adults who remain behind is so devastatingly low.
Think about your own hometown for a second if you're listening. Imagine if every single year, the top 30% of your high school graduating class pack their bags, move to another country, and practically never return to live or work.
Yeah, what would your town's economy look like 20 years from now?
Exactly. Who is starting the new businesses? Who is running for the local council? Who is innovating?
It creates a completely hollowed-out demographic. And it perfectly explains why the second vital engine of human development, the economy, has completely stalled out.
You just can't build it without the people.
Right. You cannot build a modern, robust economy if your most educated workers are systematically siphoned away the moment they are trained.
Let's actually look closely at that economic engine, because the numbers here are honestly hard to fathom. We measure the economic aspect of the HDI using gross national income, or GNI, per capita.
It's essentially the average wealth generated per person, adjusted for what that money can actually buy locally.
Exactly. To give you the global context,
Yeah.
from 1990 to 2023, the global average GNI per capita skyrocketed from roughly $11,274 to $20,327.
The world, on average, practically doubled its wealth per person in that time frame.
Now look at the FSM data. In the year 2000, FSM's GNI per capita was $4,048, and 23 years later, in 2023, it was $4,245.
I really want to emphasize the gravity of that statistic.
It's insane.
Over almost a quarter of a century, the per capita income grew by less than $200. That isn't just slow growth. That is a generation-defining economic flatline.
If my math is right, that's an economic growth rate of less than 5% total over 23 years. Meanwhile, the cost of global goods, the cost of imported food, the cost of fuel, none of that started flat.
Oh, absolutely not.
Inflation doesn't care if your local economy is stagnant.
And that is the crucial mechanism to understand about an island economy like FSM's. Because they are geographically isolated and have very limited arable land and virtually no manufacturing capacity, they have to import almost everything.
Right.
From building materials and fuel for their power plants to basic consumer goods and processed foods. When your income stays flat at around $4,200 for 2 decades, but the global price of diesel fuel and imported rice doubles, your actual standard of living is actively decaying.
It's essentially a massive, invisible pay cut for the entire country year over year, but surely there has to be some industry. I mean, they are situated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. What about fishing or tourism?
It's a great question, but the mechanics of those industries are really fraught for small island states. Take fishing, for instance. FSM controls a massive exclusive economic zone in the Pacific, incredibly rich with tuna.
Okay, so why aren't they rich?
Because they don't have the vast capital required to build and maintain massive high-tech commercial fishing fleets, or the onshore processing canneries.
So what happens? Do foreign countries just fish it?
Largely, yes. FSM sells fishing licenses to foreign fleets from countries like Japan, China, and the U.S. While those licenses definitely bring in crucial revenue for the government, the massive value add of processing, packaging, and actually selling that tuna in global markets is captured by the foreign nations, not the local FSM economy.
Oh, so it doesn't create thousands of high-paying local jobs on the islands.
Exactly.
And what about tourism?
Geography is a double-edged sword here. FSM is stunningly beautiful, incredibly culturally rich, and boasts some of the absolute best scuba diving on the planet, like the sunken fleets in Chook Lagoon.
I've heard of that. It looks amazing.
It is. But getting there is wildly expensive and logistically very difficult. Flights are infrequent and costly. They simply cannot compete with the mass market, high-volume tourism of places like Bali or Hawaii.
Which basically leaves the government as the main employer.
Exactly. And where does the government get its money? Primarily from those fishing licenses and the financial aid provided by the U.S. under the Compact of Free Association.
Wow.
So you have an economy heavily dominated by a public sector funded by external aid, with a tiny, struggling private sector that constantly loses its best talent to emigration.
It's a perfect vicious cycle. The economy can't grow because the educated workforce leaves, and the educated workforce leaves because the economy can't grow.
Exactly.
But people still live there. Over 100,000 people call those islands home. So if the economy isn't generating the wealth needed to build out modern infrastructure, how is that lack of funding impacting the physical survival of the people who stay?
Which brings us to the health dimension of the index.
Yes. And this is where the data presents a truly fascinating counter-narrative, because we discussed earlier how the COVID-19 pandemic caused a massive historic drop in global life expectancy between 2019 and 2021.
The global average dropped from 72.8 years down to 71.2 years, a staggering loss of life worldwide.
But when you look at the life expectancy data for FSM during that exact same window, it's almost like nothing happened.
From 2019 to 2021, FSM's life expectancy went from 66.20 to 66.15.
That's it.
A drop so microscopic it barely registers as a statistical change.
I have to admit, when I first saw that in the outline, I was really confused. I mean, how does a small nation with a stagnant economy and limited healthcare infrastructure manage to completely dodge the mortality wave of a highly contagious virus that brought the wealthiest nations on Earth to their knees?
It's a phenomenon we could call island resilience, or honestly, The absolute power of extreme geographic isolation.
Okay, unpack that.
FSM isn't one big landmass. It's over 600 individual islands spread across more than 1 million square miles of the Pacific Ocean. What is normally their biggest economic curse, the fact that it's incredibly difficult and expensive to move people and goods in and out, suddenly became an impenetrable biological shield.
They just shut the borders.
They executed one of the most stringent and effective border closures in the entire world. They essentially severed themselves from the global transportation grid.
Wow.
When you are a remote island nation, you don't have porous land borders where people can just walk across. You controlled the single international runway and the deepwater port.
Right?
By locking those down, they protected their communities from the initial, most deadly waves of the virus until vaccines could eventually be introduced. It is a massive testament to immense communal discipline and the tactical advantage of their geography.
It's an incredible achievement. But as I dig deeper into these numbers, I realize we probably shouldn't be popping champagne corks just yet.
No, we absolutely should not. Because while their resilience against that specific pandemic shock was highly impressive, their everyday baseline reality is deeply troubling.
Right. Even without a pandemic, FSM's absolute life expectancy over recent years hovers around 67.2 years. The global average, even after taking the massive hit from COVID, is 73.4 years.
Let's contextualize what that gap actually means in human terms. On average, a person born in the rest of the world gets to live 6 entire years longer than someone born in the Federated States of Micronesia.
6 years. I mean, that's getting to see your grandchild go from kindergarten to middle school. That's an entire decade's worth of retirement just chopped in half. If they were so good at protecting themselves from a novel virus, why is their general baseline of health so painfully low?
Because protecting a border from a virus mostly requires isolation. But building a robust, modern healthcare system requires intense connectivity and capital. And this loops right back to our stagnant $4,200 per capita economy.
Yeah.
Think about the logistics of healthcare in a nation of 600 scattered islands.
It has to be an absolute nightmare.
It is. If you live on one of the main islands where the state capitals are, you have access to a hospital. But what if you live on an outer atoll, a ring of coral 100 miles away from the main island?
Yeah, what do you do?
If you have a severe medical emergency, say a complicated appendicitis or a severe traumatic injury, you can't just call an ambulance.
You have to get on a boat.
You have to hope the inter-island ferry is running, or you have to coordinate a complex, highly expensive medevac flight using a small plane, which is entirely dependent on having clear weather and available aviation fuel.
Which they might not have money for.
Exactly. A huge portion of their healthcare budget is eaten up simply by the logistics of moving sick people across vast stretches of ocean. With a flatlined economy, they struggle to retain specialized doctors, maintain modern diagnostic equipment like MRI machines, or reliably stock complex, refrigerated pharmaceuticals across all these remote clinics.
It's not a lack of caring. It's a structural limitation of geography just violently colliding with poverty.
Well said.
And to make this reality even harsher, the sources provide another metric that shows that whatever limited wealth and health FSM does possess, it is not shared equally.
You are referring to the IHDI, the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index. This is perhaps one of the most sobering metrics in the entire stack because it totally strips away the comforting illusion of averages.
I want to try another analogy here, if you'll indulge me.
Let's hear it.
Imagine an engine. The HDI is basically telling you how much horsepower the engine theoretically produces. But the IHDI tells you how much of that power is actually making it to the wheels and how much is being lost as pure heat and friction inside the engine itself.
I like that a lot. The friction is inequality.
Right. And the global data shows that the world loses about 21.96% of its human development to inequality. So roughly a fifth of global progress is burned off as friction because health, education, and wealth are not distributed equitably across populations.
Now apply that friction to FSM. While the dataset doesn't give us their overall combined inequality loss, it provides a laser-focused look at their economic friction. FSM suffers a staggering income inequality loss of 25.79%.
Over a quarter of their income value, just gone. What does an income inequality loss of nearly 26% actually look like when you walk down the street in Pompeii or Chuck?
It means that the tiny, meager economic growth they have managed to scrape together, that extra $200 per capita over 23 years, has not lifted all boats.
Right.
In fact, it's likely concentrated in very few hands. In many small, aid-dependent island nations, you see a sharp divide. On one side, You have a relatively comfortable class of government officials, specialized expatriate workers, and owners of the few large import and export businesses.
The people connected to the money flow.
Exactly. They live in modern housing, drive imported cars, and can easily afford to fly off-island to Hawaii or Guam for specialized health care.
And on the other side?
On the other side is the vast majority of the population who are largely outside the formal, cash-based economy entirely. They rely on subsistence, agriculture growing taro and breadfruit, and artisanal fishing just to feed their families day to day. They might see very little actual cash throughout the entire year.
So a stagnant economy is painful, but a stagnant, highly unequal economy is a pressure cooker. If you are a young person looking at that reality, where the only good jobs are locked up by a small political or business class, and your subsistence farming doesn't generate the cash to buy an imported smartphone or a computer, it's no wonder you use your COFA visa to fly to Hawaii.
Exactly. The inequality is the catalyst for the brain drain. It totally validates the decision to leave.
Okay, up to this point in the deep dive, the picture is incredibly grim. We've mapped out a society struggling with stagnant wages, an education system actively bleeding its talent, challenging healthcare logistics, and deep structural inequality. It feels like the narrative is entirely about sinking.
It does.
But as I went deeper into the sources, the data takes a sharp, highly unexpected turn.
It really does. It requires us to look at the exact same society, but slice the data not by income or geography, but by gender.
And when we do that, FSM suddenly reveals an incredible story of parity. We start with a metric called the GDI, or the Gender Development Index.
Right, which takes the baseline, HDI health, education, income, and measures the ratio of how women are doing compared to men.
Exactly. A score of 1.0 means perfect equality between the sexes. The global average for GDI in 2023 is 0.955.
And what does FSM score?
FSM's GDI is 0.953. They rank 122nd globally on this specific index.
That is a staggering contrast.
Sure.
I really want the listener to grasp the magnitude of this divergence. Here is a country that ranks 157th in the world in overall human development. They are near the bottom of the global pack economically.
Yeah.
And yet internally, the parity between men and women in acquiring basic health, education, and income is almost completely aligned with the global average.
It's amazing.
Ranking 122nd in gender development means FSM's internal gender equity is wildly outperforming its macroeconomic reality.
It's like a family that might not have a lot of food on the table, but they are making absolutely certain that whatever food is there is split equally between the sons and the daughters.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. It is a remarkable testament to either deep-seated cultural norms regarding gender roles or a highly effective, targeted policy pushed by the government to prioritize female education and basic health access, even when the national treasury is virtually empty.
But as you rightly pointed out to me when we were prepping for this, achieving parity in the basics doesn't mean systemic barriers don't exist. There's a big difference between a girl being allowed to go to high school and a woman being able to safely give birth or hold political power.
Exactly, which is why we cannot stop at the GDI. We have to look at the GII, the Gender Inequality Index. While the GDI measures basic capabilities, the GII measures structural vulnerabilities and power dynamics.
And it highlights where the geographic and economic realities of FSM brutally impact women.
Yes. Let's look at reproductive health. The data shows the adolescent birth rate, the number of births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19. In FSM, that rate is 43.7. The global average is 39.1.
So young women in FSM are having children earlier than the global average.
Yes, and this is a critical metric because early childbirth frequently derails a young woman's educational trajectory. It forces her out of that expected years of schooling we discussed earlier and heavily limits her future economic independence.
Right. And then there is the maternal mortality ratio, the MMR. This is the number of women who die from pregnancy-related causes per 100,000 live births. In FSM, the MMR is 74.3.
Now, we must be careful with context here. The global average for maternal mortality is 216, so FSM is vastly outperforming the global average.
Wait, yeah, 74 is way better than 216. Why is this a problem?
Because the global average is heavily skewed by terribly high mortality rates in parts of sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. For a nation with a tiny population like FSM, an MMR of 74 means that pregnancy remains a statistically significant life-threatening event.
And I'm guessing this loops right back to the boat and the medevac problem we talked about.
Precisely. If a woman goes into complicated labor, say she starts hemorrhaging on a remote outer island in Micronesia, Emergency obstetric care and a blood transfusion are not a 10-minute ambulance right away.
You can't just call 911.
Right. It requires specialized intervention that simply does not exist on that atoll. She is entirely at the mercy of weather, fuel, and the availability of a rescue boat.
That's terrifying.
The geographic isolation creates a structural vulnerability for maternal health that is incredibly difficult to solve with a GNI of $4,200. You can achieve basic educational parity, but you cannot overcome the lethal logistics of remote childbirth without massive capital investment.
That paints a very vivid, super sobering picture of the daily risks. But amidst these deep structural and physical challenges, the sources provide one data point that is, without a doubt, the most thrilling number in this entire stack.
It really is.
When I saw the trend line for this metric, I actually gasped.
We are talking about the ultimate measure of structural power, political empowerment.
Yes. The share of seats in the national parliament held by women. For you listening, I want you to visualize a chart. Starting in the year 1990 through the entire decade of the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, all the way up to the year 2020. The percentage of women holding a seat in FSM's national parliament was a flat, stubborn, unmoving 0%.
A total absolute shutout from the highest level of national decision-making.
Not a single woman holding legislative power for 3 entire decades.
30 years is zero.
And then suddenly, an earthquake in the data. In 2021, the number ticks up. It goes from 0 to 7.14%. The 30-year ceiling cracks.
Not only.
And then just 2 years later, in the 2023 data, it instantly doubles to 14.29%. From literal 0 to over 14% in the blink of an eye.
It's incredible.
My immediate question to you is, how? I mean, is this just a statistical blip, a couple of lucky local elections, or are we looking at a systemic cultural awakening?
It is absolutely not a blip. Going from literal 0 for 30 years to 14% in 2 election cycles represents a monumental tectonic shift in the cultural and political landscape of the nation. To understand how massive this is, you have to understand the cultural context of Micronesia.
Break that down for us. What is the traditional power dynamic there?
Many traditional societies within FSM, such as in Chuuk or Pohnpei, are actually matrilineal when it comes to clan lineage and land inheritance. Women hold immense private power and respect within the family structure and in deciding who has the right to use land.
Okay, so they have power.
Yes, but the public sphere, the realm of public speaking, chiefly titles, and formal political representation, has historically been intensely patriarchal. The men are the public voice of the clan's decisions.
So the women owned the land, but the men held the microphone.
Exactly. And when FSM adopted a modern, Western-style democratic Congress, that traditional dynamic mapped directly onto the new system. Men ran for office. Men won the seats. So for a woman to break through that in 2021, it means she had to overcome deeply entrenched traditional political networks. It means that the generations of women who achieved parity in basic education, the women who built up that GDI score we talked about, have finally decided to translate that educational capital into direct public political capital. They stopped letting the men hold the microphone.
I also want to clarify the math here for the listener, because 14.29% might not sound like a massive number compared to, like, some Scandinavian countries, but FSM's National Congress is very small. It only has 14 members representing the 4 states.
Right. So going from 0 to 14.29% means going from 0 women to 2 women sitting in those 14 seats.
That's real human beings. 2 women who ran campaigns, knocked on doors, challenged male incumbents, and convinced a patriarchal electorate to vote for them. It must have completely changed the atmosphere in the congressional chamber in Palantir.
It changes everything. It is the most vital, dynamic sign of life in SSM's entire development profile.
Really?
Absolutely. Having new voices, specifically female voices, in Parliament brings entirely new priorities to the national budget. A Congress with women in it is far more likely to focus legislative attention on solving those horrific outer island maternal mortality logistics we talked about.
Or funding early childhood education, or creating local economic models that might finally stem the tide of the brain drain.
Exactly. It shows that even when a country is trapped by global economic currents, profound internal transformation is still possible. The people are not just passive victims of the data, they are actively reshaping their society.
And this idea of reshaping society brings us perfectly to the final and perhaps most philosophical metric in our data stack. Because up until now, our entire conversation has been predicated on one core assumption. The rest of the world is succeeding, the global bullet train is the ideal, and FSM is failing to keep up.
Right, we've been looking at the traditional HDI as the ultimate, unquestionable scoreboard of human progress.
But the sources provide one final index that forces us to question the validity of the scoreboard itself, the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
This index asks the quiet part out loud. It asks, what is the actual physical cost of the rest of the world's success?
Right, because it turns out you can't build a bullet train without mining the steel and burning the coal to lay the tracks. The PHDI takes the country's standard human development score and actively penalizes it based on the environmental damage caused to achieve that lifestyle.
It looks specifically at carbon dioxide emissions and the material footprint per capita.
And when you apply this penalty globally, the bill for human progress is staggering. When you factor in the planetary pressures, the world's overall human development score drops by over 10%.
10% of all human progress is essentially nullified by the environmental destruction required to achieve it.
That's massive.
Let's look at the per capita mechanics of that destruction. To maintain the global average lifestyle in 2023, a single global citizen emits 4.54 tons of CO2 every year. Furthermore, their material footprint, which is the total mass of biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, and nonmetallic minerals extracted from the earth to meet their consumption demands, is 12.71 tons per person.
12 tons of the Earth's crust extracted, processed, and consumed for every single person, every single year.
It's wild.
That is the engine of the global success we've been comparing FSM against. It is an engine fueled by massive, relentless planetary extraction and pollution.
Now let's look at FSM's footprint. The sources show FSM's CO2 emissions are only 1.30 tons per capita.
1.30 compared to 4.54. That means FSM's per capita emissions are a mere 2.6% of the global average. Their planetary pressure is a microscopic fraction of the global norm.
They are living a remarkably low-pressure existence.
Okay, but I have to push back here because it feels like we are romanticizing poverty. I look at that 1.30 tons of CO2 and I say, that's great for the polar bears, that's great for the ozone layer, but FSM is ranking 157th in the world.
I hear you.
They have a stagnant economy, their smart kids are leaving, and women are still struggling to get emergency health care on outer islands. You can't eat a low-carbon footprint. You can't pay for a medevac flight with zero emissions. Isn't their low footprint just a tragic side effect of being poor and unindustrialized?
That is the traditional 20th century way of interpreting the data. And you are right. Historically, lack of emissions was just a symptom of a lack of industry, but we are not in the 20th century anymore.
No, we're not.
We have to fundamentally flip the script on how we view economic assets in the modern era of climate change.
How so? Like practically?
High-income countries, the ones at the top of the HDI rankings, have achieved their so-called growth by borrowing heavily and perhaps fatally from the planet's future. Their entire development model is biologically and physically unsustainable. As the catastrophic effects of climate change accelerate, the massive carbon-heavy infrastructures of the developed world, their coal plants, their gas-guzzling logistics networks, their concrete-heavy urban sprawls, are rapidly transitioning from being economic assets to becoming massive economic liabilities.
Because they are going to have to spend trillions of dollars to tear all that down and retrofit it to be green.
Exactly. They have immense carbon debt. FSM, conversely, represents a prototype for low-pressure growth model.
Right.
Because they never industrialized in the dirty 20th century way, they don't have that legacy carbon infrastructure to dismantle. They have a relatively blank slate.
So you were saying their lack of development is actually a strategic advantage.
It is a vital natural endowment. In an era where green is becoming the most valuable global currency, FSM possesses pristine natural capital and a remarkably low-emission baseline. They are proving that a society can exist and indeed achieve gender parity and basic educational access without strip mining the earth and choking the atmosphere.
But how do they monetize that? How does a low-carbon footprint fix the stagnant $4,200 GNI?
Through the geopolitics of climate finance. The developed world is pouring billions of dollars into funds like the Green Climate Fund, aiming to help developing nations build sustainable infrastructure.
Oh, I see.
FSM's incredibly low PHDI penalty is a geopolitical lever. They can go to the international community and say, we are the victims of your sea level rise, but we are also the model of your low-carbon future. Invest in us.
Wow. Help us build solar microgrids across our 600 islands.
Exactly. Help us build zero-emission inter-island transport. They can leapfrog the dirty phase of development entirely and attract global capital precisely because they are green.
That is a fascinating reframing. They don't need to chase the destructive industrial models of the 1990s. They can position themselves as the sustainable island model of the 2050s.
Exactly. Their future isn't in catching up to a broken system. It's in leveraging their unique position to pioneer a new one.
We have covered an immense, almost overwhelming amount of ground today. We've gone from the mechanics of a small island nation's economic struggles to questioning the very definition of human progress on Earth. To synthesize this deep dive for you listening, we've distilled this massive stack of data into 4 critical takeaways. What is the roadmap for FSM?
Number 1. They must address the growth crisis. FSM is suffering from an illusion of growth on paper while sliding backward globally. To truly advance, they must unblock the GNI stagnation. A quarter-century of flat wages is the anchor holding their healthcare, infrastructure, and societal potential underwater.
Number 2, the education fix. The R&D lab needs to keep its patents. They have to find ways to convert the 11.5 expected years of schooling into actual domestic labor skills.
Yes.
This means creating local economic incentives, perhaps in green tech or sustainable marine management, to stop the brain drain to the U.S.
Yes.
You cannot build a nation if your smartest, most ambitious youth feel economically forced to leave.
Number 3. Empowerment. The most brilliant, hopeful spark in their entire data profile is the recent surge in women holding parliamentary seats. Going from 0 to 14% is a cultural revolution. They must fiercely protect and accelerate this momentum. Having women in legislative power could be the exact catalyst needed to creatively solve the first 2 problems, bringing fresh perspectives to stagnant economic and healthcare policies.
And finally, number 4, the green lever. FSM needs to weaponize their incredibly low planetary footprint. They should no longer view their lack of heavy industry as a symptom of underdevelopment, but rather as a highly valuable global asset.
Precisely.
They are perfectly positioned to attract international climate finance and pioneer a sustainable, low-pressure model of island development.
If they can align those 4 elements, they move from being a victim of global currents to becoming a uniquely Pacific architect of their own future.
And that brings me to a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We started this deep dive talking about the feeling of being on a treadmill. For decades, we, the global community, have ranked countries purely by how fast they run on that economic machine. Consume more, extract more, build more, emit more, go faster. If you run the fastest, you are the most developed.
A race predicated on endless extraction.
But as the planetary pressures mount and the climate data becomes undeniable, we have to realize that the treadmill itself is starting to catch fire. What if the ultimate measure of a country's future isn't how fast they consume and grow?
Right.
What if the true measure of success in the 21st century is how resiliently a nation can exist without destroying the ground they run on?
It forces us to completely reevaluate who is actually winning the race.
FSM's future isn't in trying to frantically chase the global HDI average by adopting the destructive high-carbon habits of the industrialized world. Their future is in redefining what a sustainable, highly developed island nation actually looks like. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We highly encourage you to look at your own country's data, your own treadmill, with this new multidimensional lens. Until next time.